Let's talk spreadsheets. When do you use them? How do you use them? What do you use them for? Producers, go ahead, submit your questions. Be sure to vote them up or down if those questions you want to use for a later date. Our panel is ready to show you how they use them, whether it be for analytics, in production, and they've also got demos. So you know what, Alex, if you are ready, I would love to start with you are all right, let's start with Ryan. Let's start with Ryan. And Ryan, so just even at the beginning of the show, you had even shared that you're more so on the Microsoft suite. And if you want to just kind of talk us through how you're using them and why even Microsoft, because there's a difference between those who are using the Google products and then Microsoft. So help lay the foundation for us as we dive in.
Today, we're going to talk about Google Sheets. We're going to talk about the Microsoft ecosystem and Excel. Alex is going to talk about numbers a little bit. And spreadsheets are spreadsheets, right? So we might see some very interesting spreadsheets. We might see some different use cases for them. But when we're trying to decide which ecosystem to work in, we need to think about the entire ecosystem. And so if Craig joins us, he's going to talk about the automations and the API availability to, push data into a sheet or a tab in a sheet, pull data out of it. Alex might look a little bit at the numbers ecosystem for how it can be more visually appealing to the end consumer. And as we look kind of at what I'm advocating for in the Microsoft suite, in Microsoft 365, we're going to talk about the places and shareability that data kind of resides and some of the things we can do with it there. So CJ's got a graphic related to the Microsoft Power Platform all up. And the Microsoft Power Platform is a little bit of a new naming convention. It's been around for probably 5 or 6 years at this point. But you can see here the different ways that data can be stored, data can be automated in and out, and how it can be visualized. And so when we're thinking about spreadsheets, we can put those in OneDrive, which I mentioned earlier, as a place that is kind of my storage area by default. OneDrive files are just visible to me, but with a click of a button, I can share a file out of OneDrive with an individual colleague inside my organization or outside my organization. And then we've got SharePoint, which is another place that operates just like OneDrive. It uses the same OneDrive for Business client to sync those files onto my local machine or outside my machine to the cloud. And files that are stored there, we can actually use the Power Automate solution that you see here to drive data in and out of. We can also build something on the Power Platform called a Canvas app. And a Canvas app creates a bespoke user experience. So if we were, let's say, running a pre-show checklist or a guest onboarding, or we're creating a form in some way that was for authenticated users, we can create a Canvas app using Power Apps, and the database for that app can be an Excel file. Now, a lot of people think about Google Sheets as a place we need to go if we want to share and collaboratively edit, but Microsoft Excel, and particularly Excel files that are stored in OneDrive or in SharePoint, truly are equally collaboratively editable. So, the user experience for personal use isn't quite as quick to stand it up, right? OneDrive and SharePoint are a little bit more of an enterprise scenario, but we absolutely can share those files from one person to the next. And then Power BI can be used to visualize that data. So if we collect a bunch of form responses, for example, we can always use Power BI to create visuals that show us aggregate information on, the frequency of the response or some of the data that we collect along the way. One other thing I'll mention here is the ability to kind of move from spreadsheets as a data source into Dataverse. So if we're using the Power Platform and we're looking back at that visual, you'll see Dataverse in the lower right. And that is another, basically it's an advanced version of SQL. It's cloud hosted by default. It's got API capabilities in and out. And so, we can kind of move from something that we can regard as a little bit more brittle, right, as a backend for an application. It's not ideal to be using a spreadsheet stored in SharePoint for that, but we can migrate that data up into Dataverse, and then we've got something that's much more robust and enterprise grade, but still accessible to organizations that are smaller. You don't need to be a big company to take advantage of these. So those are some of the things I wanted to walk through as a baseline on the Microsoft front, Liberty.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Ryan. Craig, I'm looking forward to hearing just even how you use it, especially since you work with helping companies with just their overall digital transformation and getting them set up. So the floor is yours.
Thanks, Liberty. Sorry, I had some hardware challenges this morning. I've worked with spreadsheets since the beginning, and I absolutely love all of them, whether it's Excel or Google Sheets or even numbers. And in my job, we have a software product, and even though it has nothing to do with Excel, Excel is always our main competitor because when you think about it, it's the go-to whiteboard. If you've got data or something you're trying to organize, it's the easiest thing to just jump in and put your information there, whether it's just a bunch of text and lists or numbers, and just resort and filter. That's the go-to for almost everybody for this sort of thing. The thing I love about it is not just that, but that it's this sort of stepping stone into building functionality, building some sort of features. And, at the far extreme is you're actually building an application, or at least a prototype for an application. And so you can just start with, I'm going to list this, and I'm going to add this filter, and maybe I can add this formula and this function and do this thing. And before you know, it's a chunk of functionality, whether it's in a static document or something to share. And over the years, I've been, I was more in the Excel camp, but more and more these days, I love the collaboration available that is, I'd say it's more built into the Google Sheets. They, when I look at the two, they each have some useful trade-offs, but for me, a lot of the use cases that I get drawn into are more on the Google side of collaborating without a lot of functionality and configuration. So I can bring people in. We're just organizing something around the family, and I created a Google spreadsheet and had people join, and other people needed to come in and do some things. And we could do that without a lot of training. And that's just a really handy test case for being able to collaborate without a lot of fanfare. I know you can do it with Excel, and we've done a lot of that, but it is a little bit clunkier. There is sync issues from time to time. It's gotten a lot better than it was at the very beginning, which is almost unusable, in my opinion. But so I'd give the collaboration much more in the Google camp, but they both have useful trade-offs.
Now, for all of those who are wondering, sheets and graphics, do those two go together? Well, Jeff is going to share with us how he uses this in his productions. Jeff?
We've been using data-driven sources for decades, practically. Started off with the Excel world because that was really kind of the only thing. And then as Google Sheets become more and more common, we become very adept at using and adapting to what is functionality inside those different Google Sheets. Just making sure my video is sanitized that I need to share here. So I do have a couple of options that we use. One of those is we use it for simple everyday, sorry about the resolution there. Let's try that. Okay. So we use it for simple rundowns. So this is our base template that we use from a company called Get on Hub. It's a free open source software that does rundowns. And so we use the sheet to feed the data into the rundown. And then we end up with a Q sheet that looks like a spreadsheet, but it's actually just a data-driven source at that point. And if we wanted to get deeper into it, we have the modules inside to be able to do that. So the data is really the key there, and how easy it is to get into Google Sheet is where we probably end up with it more so than anything. On the graphic side, practically every graphic that we work with, every graphic software and every graphic that we do is data-driven. Because I don't want to have to worry about going into a proprietary software backend to edit this one little lower third or this sidebar or whatever. Those are all data points that are brought in by the software. And so those data points are data points coming from either a spreadsheet or it could be from another source that's into a spreadsheet and then sucked out of the spreadsheet to the graphic software. So we use everything from CharacterWorks, NewBlue, VizRT, Expression. Every single one of those is basically talking to a Google Sheet in order to bring the data in. And that could be names, that could be scores, that could be pretty much anything stats-wise that you can dream up to have on a graphic. It's going to come off of a data source. And the real reason for that is I could give anybody that data source, that spreadsheet, that Google Sheet, and say, here, you update this. And that is the key of using that as a data-driven source for our graphics. And that's just the way pretty much everything in our sports broadcast is done off of Google Sheets mostly now. I rarely ever have to open up Excel. Just very, very rarely.
So there's a lot of chatter going on. This is definitely a popular conversation. Just hearing from Leo, he says, in my experience, sharing with MS is much harder than Google. The same as trying to get into a Teams call versus Zoom. And then Danny also says that his all-time favorite software is a RAM resident database called Panorama by ProView. And then John also shares, just overall, I feel like Microsoft has done a better job picking up the collaboration functionality of Google Sheets than Google has picked up the functionality I use from Excel. So keep the conversation going and submitting your questions. And next, Alex, how are you using spreadsheets?
Well, we use them in a lot of different ways, and I use a lot of different ones. I think people have already talked about Google Sheets. So for our rundowns, crew lists, many of the things that we do, we use Google Sheets for that because of and mostly because the interactivity between them, I still think is way better than anybody else's. So that's how Google Sheets is the easiest one for us to collaborate with. When it comes to numbers, though, most of my bids in some way, shape, or form, and they can be very colorful and very not colorful, but they allow me to use white space. And when you want to throw together a bid and send to someone, white space is very powerful. I can tell you that you stand out very quickly with other folks. And so I'll give you an example. I just made this up, so this is all none of these numbers are really accurate. But if you look at this is the kind of thing that I can throw together in numbers. There's not really any complex things going on. It just looks a little nicer. So I can say, well, this is how I'm going to do it, and I can just put it right into the bid. And these are all shapes that I had. Like I have my own shapes in here, for instance. So you see my shapes down here. I have like little satellite trucks and crews and cameras and things and logos and so those are all available to me as I work there. But then all of this stuff is all, obviously these are driven, from, you can see as I select these are all driven from here. But you'll notice, and I just did this as an example, this text isn't the same size as those texts. The cells aren't connected. These are different sheets. These are in one sheet, but they're different tables. And so and now I will say this does not export to Excel or to Google well. so it's a very ugly thing. So I use it for things that I don't expect to do that with. But I can put all the things in of what the costs are going to be for a show. And I just find it to be more visually pleasing and easier to look at for a client, especially clients that aren't doing this all the time and aren't sitting in Excel. I'm mostly working with marketing, not with someone in finance. And so as a result, having this kind of broken out and being able to look at it there makes sense. Now I can also do things like in here, I have hidden let's see if I unhide all columns, you'll see these are some internal costs. Now this one isn't that great, but these are internal costs versus external costs. And I leave them red like that so that you don't accidentally send stuff out that way. So you hide select columns back. And so you can kind of work with those and kind of build these out and then export this out as a PDF. So these are but this is the kind of thing. It's not exactly like this, but oftentimes I will be the only one that's using numbers to do the bid. And I definitely have gotten bids because I've definitely gotten jobs because my bids look different than everyone else's. And people are used to kind of seeing this wall of cells. And so when I do bids, I do them in numbers. When I do and estimates, I do them in numbers because I can make it look. And this is about the most basic version of what I do. But you can basically make it look like. And oftentimes that will come with a Keynote document that will walk through things. I can also cut and paste this from. I can grab this from numbers and put it into Keynote, and the cells will all still work in Keynote. So if I grab this all down, I can cut and paste it in, and when I have it in Keynote, I can sit there and keep on changing things, and it's all going to keep working. It's not like it's just an image that I put into it. So there's a lot of power to that when it comes to client-facing solutions.
And now on to the question of the hour, pivot tables, CJ.
So I just wanted to mention about numbers. The other thing that's nice about it is that it was the first ever spreadsheet application to bring in the concept of using individual tables within a worksheet, and the tables would all float and not necessarily need to have all their columns be related to one another. But because it takes that page layout approach, you can put images in there. You can put USDZ files, just like you do in Keynote. You can drop them into numbers and move them around, and that's super powerful. So what I'm going to talk about, we just kind of left numbers is great when we're talking about the human, if we're thinking like a human, but a lot of our systems are driven on the back end by some sort of database, whether that database is a budget, whether that database is sales records, whether that database is an edit decision list. An edit decision list is just a spreadsheet. It's just a text file. Our whole world is driven by text files. And if you can start to use the tools that are available with a spreadsheet tool to be able to manipulate those text files and analyze them, you all of a sudden just feel like you have superpowers. So again, what I'm going to be talking about isn't so much something like this, and this is what we're used to when we think of spreadsheets, a budget tracker or something like that. I want to talk about the boring stuff. When you do an export out of your database and it looks like this, and you're like, okay, there's 10,000 rows here. I'm a human being. Human beings were not designed to look at giant spreadsheets. They were designed to look at pictures and look at summaries and make decisions on those things. So whenever you find yourself in a situation like this, first thing that I find myself doing is I highlight that whole darn table. I hit Command-T or Control-T if you're on Windows, turn it into a table. Now I have all this filtering where I can filter my data, move it around. And then the next thing I do is I don't delete, but I hide the columns that I don't want. Like I don't care about the product name, the customer name, all this stuff. This is getting in the way and it's making these cells small and hard to read. So I just hit Control-0, and now the numbers have gone away. And now all of a sudden, the columns I don't want have gone away. And the other thing that now that it's a table is you now have a button right here. And I know that this isn't the only way to do it. This is just the way that I like to do it. There's a button here that says Summarize with PivotTable. And this is a mystery to a lot of people. When Sheets first came out, it didn't have PivotTables. When Numbers first came out, it didn't have PivotTables. Now they all do. So this isn't an Excel exclusive, but I want to introduce you to the concept. So I hit Summarize with PivotTable. It automatically selects, the table that was there. And now what I can do is over here, I'm actually going to make this a little smaller so we can zoom in a little bit. Over here, I have all of those columns up at the top. Those are fields. So if I want to, for example, say, I'd like to really see my sales numbers. So I could say, okay, put my sales numbers there. Whoops, put my sales numbers in values. And I'd like to see that by region. Okay, I'm going to put region in rows. And then I'd like to see that by subcategory. And now what it's done, subcategory, that's too complex. I'd really like it by category. And then when I stack them, I have these little disclosure buttons that I can start to collapse and summarize. And if I hit collapse all up here in PivotTables. But the point being, you can take that 10,000 row spreadsheet that came out of your database and get answers on that pretty quickly. The other thing that I want to say is, I drug quantity by accident. This trackball from Kensington has a little delay. If I don't click and hold for a second before I start dragging, it gets busy. The other thing that not a lot of people realize in Excel is that number formatting doesn't have to be hard. If you use your Control and Shift and you hit 4 where the dollar sign is, it turns into dollars. 5 is a percent. 1's number, 2 and 3 are date formats. You can move that stuff around. It's really nice. But now I have, instead of a 10,000 cell spreadsheet, I have a summary that I can use to start to make decisions. Because all a pivot table is doing is it's letting you look at your data in aggregate. And you can start to slice and dice your data in different ways. If I'd like to see that over different years, I could drag years into the columns, or by different quarters, I can do it that way. So that would be the big thing for pivot table. The other superpower that I think people don't realize is in Excel is the ability to compare two different sets of data and fill in information. So I have over here back in orders, I have this region, which is central. And then I have this people spreadsheet where I say, hey, these are the, I'm actually going to move this a little bit. These are the managers that go that have those regions. So I want to put the manager's name on the report. I can do that if I make a new Excel window. So I'm just going to make a different window into the same house here really quickly. And I'll zoom in so we can see it. And then back on orders, all a VLOOKUP is you're comparing the data in this spreadsheet and looking at this one. So if this says central here, I want it to pull back the manager who's in central. And then I can say equals VLOOKUP, hit this. And then I've done about 1 million of these, so you can forgive the speed. And then I want to look in column 2. And then all of a sudden my whole spreadsheet just fills with names. And now if I go back to the pivot table, now that instead of looking at regions, which are kind of impersonal, I can look at names. Anytime that you have two different sets of data, anytime that you have two different spreadsheets and you want to compare them together, you can use basic text manipulation tools in order to produce and get answers. And you have to go into it, because I learned Excel not by going to a class, but by going into it with a goal. And I used to use it Google a whole lot, and I would say, hey, I have this set of data and I want to do this. Now I sit there with ChatGPT and I explain the situation that I'm trying to do, and it'll come up with it, and we'll brainstorm on how are we going to get answers out of a large data set in a database. The other thing that I'll do is if I have an error with a particular formula of mine, I'll paste it into ChatGPT, and then I'll say, hey, what's wrong with this formula? And oftentimes it comes with a really, really intelligent answer that I end up learning from of here's what's going on with your spreadsheet. So think about it. You're going to start with a big block of text out of a database that's good for a computer to read. You're going to synthesize that down and distill it down to something that's useful for us as humans. And then you're going to take that output over to numbers so that we can make it pretty and get the bid.
Thank you so much for that, CJ, tying a bow on this. Craig?
Good. So, I think just from an overall, I think pivot tables are amazing. Just to go back to just the overall, I think it's really important. People always ask, what's the best spreadsheet? It's like, well, it's like saying, what's the best tool in your toolbox? And a lot of it really depends on what's the culture of the team that you're going to be collaborating with or sharing with. If it's a completely Microsoft shop, I would never recommend in a million years for them to take on Google Sheets. They're going to be super frustrated. It's just not going to work, and vice versa. Or if they're a very Mac-centric shop and doing a lot, as Alex was saying, with with slides and everything else, Keynote rather, then numbers might be the best way to go. So it's really the culture. What is the use case? If you're dealing with massive data sets, Excel tends to be really good at dealing with a lot of that. If you're not, up into the database size of things, but if you're dealing with 100,000 rows of something, Google Sheets tends to be a little sluggish around those sizes. But if you're doing it in Excel, it's pretty handy for that. So a lot of it also depends beyond the culture. What's the actual use case? If it's a small thing and you need to collaborate a lot and the people are not Office 365 savvy, then Google might be a better choice. But it doesn't always come down to what is the best, no matter what, because so many other things play into account much more. Because I think overall, a lot of these are 80, 90%, especially when you think of the features and functionality that most people use. Most of that is going to be on most of the platforms.
What a great conversation. Now let's get into the questions. Alexander?
First question is from Tommy Chance in St. Paul, Minnesota. What AV software can use spreadsheet data to import and or export data?
Alex?
Most. so most have some way to do it. The key is you have to figure out what the format is. Is it an XML? Is it are you sending a CSV? Are you sending, there's a lot of different ways that we can grab that data. For instance, one of the things that we've done in the past, for a while, we had to give you a sense of a workflow. We wrote a script inside of Photoshop that would go to go to an Excel database, and it would grab names and titles, and if they had a Twitter, and if they made a bunch of decisions, and it would build their lower third and insert it into an ATEM switcher using the ATEM plugin. So, and why we would use that is every session would change every moment. What it would do is it would automate. We would say, oh, here's the next session now, all the way up until half an hour before the session, or 15 minutes before the session. The client could sit there and check spellings, titles, everything that was there. The team could be checking that stuff. We would grab that, hit go, point towards that session file, and it would spit. And suddenly the ATEM would just go, whoop, and it would just replace everything with the names that were updated for that show. And so that's kind of an example of grabbing that data. But once you have those columns, you can have, obviously, as mentioned earlier, edit decision lists, lots of other things that are available to you. You just have to figure out how to format it.
CJ?
And look out if you see a .txt, meaning it's tab delimited, or a .csv. You just think to yourself, all that is a spreadsheet. And sometimes you need to use an Excel or a different tool to take it, from one format into another, or you need something to clean up the line endings if it uses, a Unix line ending or a Windows line ending. And that's where other tools like a COT editor or a BB edit that are a real good text editor can tell you how that thing is formatted. And then and I'm not sure exactly how to do it in numbers and sheets, but if you're in Excel, get really good at navigating the text to columns tool, because that allows you to take a single row and then you can figure out, okay, is this delimited with a comma, delimited with a tab? And sometimes, like if all of the descriptions and all of my edits or all of the whatever that field is as a /, even though that's not a standard delimiter, after the fact, you can start to break apart your columns. So be on the lookout for text to columns as you're going in and out of your software, because that can help you as you're editing.
Next question.
Samuel Nordvik in Norway asks, when sharing a Google Sheet with apps, script functions that can modify the sheet, the receiver is asked to give access to their entire Google Sheets. Is there a way to work around this to give access to only one sheet?
Craig?
Yeah, unfortunately not. It is a super daunting, scary thing. Give this person or functionality complete retro access to everything you know and own. It's a scary thing. One of the things that I try to do is there's a lot of background tasks that can be automated, run, and so I'll have sheets that my software runs in the background, and that someone that's joining it and wants to use it doesn't need to grant access to that scripting. So they can pull down a menu or do something like check a box, and I can have something react to that in the background, does that scripting work and make the change, and they didn't need to give permission. So that's another option to think about is what would they need to get access to, and is there another way to have that be a background function running as you or someone, so that they wouldn't have to give up the rights to all of their stuff.
Next question.
John Snyder in Reno, Nevada asks, on a scale of 0 to January 10, 1900, rate your personal spreadsheet skills. What do you think are the fundamentals for someone who is learning?
Ryan?
What I can say about my personal spreadsheet wielding skills is that they are getting worse. When I was a young analyst, I had to use Excel all day, every day. And and this is kind of speaking to the question about the fundamentals, when we'd be put in a course as a group, one of the things that early analysts in their career tend to compete on is who needs to use the mouse the least when they're navigating Excel. And so in terms of learning the fundamentals, I recommend YouTube. There are dozens of courses, and there's a particular creator named Kevin Stratford, who actually came from Microsoft. He has since kind of left Microsoft and gone full-time out on a YouTube journey to try and educate folks on not just the Microsoft stack, but Google Sheets and everything that kind of competes with those ecosystems to give a pretty well-rounded and balanced view. And, one of those kind of fundamentals that I would recommend looking into beyond pivot tables, like CJ has mentioned, would be VLOOKUP, and then the more advanced version of VLOOKUP, which is index match.
No, XLOOKUP. Index and match has been superseded. I'm sorry, I have to jump in. Index and match is so good. Or
Totally.
Index and match. XLOOKUP is the man.
Greg?
Yeah, I was just going to totally agree with CJ. So for those that don't know the formulas, VLOOKUP is a way to look up in a table to say, hey, look up this name and give me their number or salary or things like that. So it's super handy to do lookups. And that was the original lookup mechanism. But you had to go on the left side of the table and look right. And then they came out with, another feature was index match, which is just that one step too complicated for people to sort of understand. And then they came out with XLOOKUP, which means you can look up something in the middle of a table and go left or right, and it's totally the right way to go. And so I used to try to get people to learn index match, and it's just that one step too far. But XLOOKUP is definitely the way to go. As far as overall, I always encourage people to play around. I think AI can play a huge role of explain this formula to me. Just paste it into your favorite AI agent, and it does a really good job of explaining why certain things are working or even not working. If you're not getting the results you want, paste it into GPT or something else and say, explain how this is limiting this or whatever the problem is. And then the two areas I would say explore a lot more are the filtered group areas, depending on whether you're Excel or Google, or numbers. Being able to take an area, as CJ was doing at the beginning, and Jeff, be able to filter based on certain criteria on a row or whatnot. Being really good at that will help you manipulate data really easily and do a good job there. And then the other aspect is play around with pivot tables. They seem really daunting, but if you select a set of data and just play around with, what is this? Because there's a few different controls on it. There's some good YouTube and other things, but I think playing around with it, at least for me, I learn a lot by messing up and trying a few things. You don't have to know everything inside and out for the whole spreadsheet or anything else, but I'd say that pivot tables and filter regions, groups are two ways to get a better sense of and ownership of the data and manipulate it.
CJ?
And I got to apologize. I didn't mean to jump all over Ryan about index and match. It was just such a... the other day, here's what happened. I had a really complex index and match where I was trying to look up like steel costs, and I was trying to look at a size over here and a width and a thickness up here, and I was trying to get to the intersection of those 2 points. And I was so frustrated because index and match was driving me nuts that I sat there with ChatGPT and I said, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's how I'm doing it now. Is there a better way to do this? And I do the thing that Alex teaches us, which is set the context. Hey, you are an Excel expert. This is the issue. Explain it to somebody who's not a computer genius on how this is going to, or just give me the output without a lot of explanation if ChatGPT is being chatty that day. And that's where I ended up with the XLOOKUP. And that's where I would say, I look at the way I use Excel a lot like the way that I play the piano. I didn't learn how to read music until I played the piano for 14 years because I was just kind of figuring it out. And I was just going in with a mission. I want to play this song. I want to achieve, I want to figure out, I have a question. I have a big data set and I have a question. Which one of my states am I spending the most in transportation in? Or which one of my... which one of my line items in the budget is constantly higher than I was expecting? when I go and approach the data with a mission, then I end up picking up all these little tips and tricks. And that's something like, it's going to sound kind of, whatever. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I liken it to like a jazz musician who doesn't know how to read music. Like, they're a really talented musician, but they're not going to know everything technically perfectly. And everyone's experience with a spreadsheet is different because everyone's mission is different and what they're trying to achieve.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Indianapolis, Indiana. So when using a spreadsheet as a data source other than Office 365, what is your favorite file host for multiple user access?
Go ahead, CJ.
I think that Google Sheets, whenever multi-user access, I still think that Google Sheets is king. I have Microsoft 365 spreadsheets, a lot of them that we use for work, and internally within our organization, it works pretty well. But I also have ones that we collaborate with some of our vendors on, and we're in we built up a tenant, an instance to allow them to be a guest within our Microsoft Office 365 organization, and we're sharing a file back and forth. If everybody's on Web Excel, it's great. If Ryan's on Windows Excel and I'm on Mac Excel and Craig's on Web Excel, that's where it starts to get into fits.
Next question.
Next question's from me. What is a pivot table and when do you need them?
CJ.
Easiest way to think about a pivot table is it a way to take a huge data set and make a summary out of it so that you can really get an idea of what the data is telling you. For example, recently I went and I downloaded with the, get your data from Apple. So you're going to see a couple embarrassing things in here, I'm sure. But these are every iTunes purchase I've made since 2007 is on this spreadsheet. It is 4,100 lines long. I have no way of knowing anything valuable right now. I might be curious, but I'd really like to know, how has my spending evolved over time? So I took this spreadsheet, I turned it into a pivot table. I said, give me the years and then give me the dollar values. And then show me over year, how has my spending changed? And I'd say, I wonder how much has my spending changed since Apple introduced in-app purchases. So I'm going to go up to content type and put that in a filter and then say, show me just subscriptions. In-app subscriptions. Hey, look at that. 2019 was a good year. I would have no idea to know how much money that I spent without really digging deep, how much money I spent on these subscriptions if I wasn't playing with it. And really, the pivot table gives you the flexibility to start playing with the data and having a conversation with it. Well, how much did I spend on music? How much did I spend on Apple One? How much did I spend on Apple Music? What if I wanted to see two of them together? And then that can start to help you analyze, again, a large data set. Not everybody has a large data set, but a lot of our production applications and even hardware, like if we're doing like an export of, an export out of a field sound recorder, for example, that has all of the clips and what was the metadata that was on them. Even just your file metadata could be exported into a database and then analyzed with a pivot table. So anytime you have a set that is more than, 1 or 2 pages long that you can look at, you need to stop thinking about how do I have a human interpret this and saying, okay, how can I have a computer aggregate this into more bite-sized chunks so I can take a look.
Craig?
Didn't know if you're going to throw it to me. So that was a great example. I think if you have a large table like CJ was just showing, being able to pull out and compare bits, you can do that. If everybody has them there, here's the formulas I like to use. You could do sum ifs and count ifs and do all of that functionality, but you just saw him be able to click a couple of different things, and it's basically looking at the data in a whole new way that it's so much more flexible and easier to just explore the data rather than having to rack your brain for, how do I compare this? If I do a count if, and then if you get the basics of pivot tables, you're going to be amazed at how many ways you can find uses for it.
Go ahead, CJ.
Yeah, Craig really hit it on the head. You don't have to remember all of the functions. It's a much more drag and drop, point and click way of interacting with your data. And you got to remember, a data analytics tool, I know I'm getting a little bit away from spreadsheets, but any data analysis tool is not going to answer the question for you. It is going to help you ask more questions. The data should be something that makes you think, why is that? And then dig deeper and dig deeper and dig deeper. And if you find yourself encumbered by complex formulas and a lot of code and really complicated, highly technical things, you get discouraged from asking those next questions. The pivot, something that's more a simple view, like a Power BI or a Tableau, or in this case, what a lot of folks use is a pivot table to give you data analysis and help you ask better questions, is low friction enough that it makes you comfortable asking the next question. You're not so exhausted from getting to the answer that you're afraid to ask the next question.
Next question.
John Prado in Las Vegas, Nevada. Can Ryan explain the differences between a database and a spreadsheet and when a user might use each?
Ryan?
A user should almost always start with a spreadsheet because it allows for you to rapidly prototype and get the framework laid out, and there's a heck of a lot less infrastructural kind of setup required. You know, a database tends to require a server, and the next question, we'll get into some of those cloud type databases that are making databases much more accessible than they were even just 5 and 10 years ago. But first, start with a spreadsheet and then graduate up to a database. Now, when you need to move to a database, really is when you're going to start to get multiple people involved, when you've got security requirements or data integrity requirements where there needs to be kind of a backup set and versioning, when you want to start to build metadata. So, you know, when you have a database, you can have additional tables that indicate who modified a thing, when it was last modified, what the prior version of a row was. We can do automatic things related to duplicate detection and sorting. And then we can generally create APIs that can, or any other type of connection to that database where other applications, whether it's data visualization, CJ mentioned Power BI, he mentioned Tableau, right? If we want to visualize the data, that's much more brittle if we're doing that based on a spreadsheet. And, you know, we don't really want to be emailing spreadsheets around because not only could that data get loose and find its way into places we'd rather it not end up, but, you know, it also is subject to getting screwed up if it's in a spreadsheet compared with a database that can have much more robust capabilities to keep things high integrity.
Craig?
Yeah, I agree with everything Ryan just said. The other just 2 points would be performance. You can deal with a large set of data much faster if you have a database behind it. It is a little bit more brittle in that you can't just make a lot of changes on the fly with this database. So I totally agree on the using a spreadsheet as a prototype first, and then saying, all right, let's make this a database. So it's, for me, it's the size of the data and performance, and to a certain extent, the security. If you want to make sure that only certain people have access to certain bit data points, but you need it to do the analysis.
Next question.
Josh in New York asks, how do you decide when it is time to drop the spreadsheet and move to a more powerful tool like Airtable, Smartsheet, etc.?
Ryan?
So everything that we talked about with regard to moving from a spreadsheet to a database applies here, but Airtable in particular was one of those early, much more accessible versions of a cloud database that anybody can use. So, you know, there's cost implications. Airtable isn't free, especially as you start to scale the number of users that are in the mix. So you don't want to necessarily rush there. But if you make that investment in Airtable, now you've got API endpoints that are easier to connect to and are more robust. And like we said, there's traceability and visibility into who changed an element. And when they changed that element, we can visualize the data much more rapidly. Smartsheets, as an example of one of these tools, gives us this ability to kind of look at things in a more Excel, visual style. So it's really approachable, but gives you those same abilities. But you can create forms over this data, right? So there's an easier experience to enter data than just having to look at it in a table format. and the visuals. So forms over data, graphs over the aggregate of that data are two of the really big benefits. And then there's, in both of those cases, there's an add-on ecosystem. There is for Google Sheets, there is for Excel, but here we've got all these apps that are in a marketplace that can be deployed and natively collaborated upon. And if we're talking about Airtable, then it's logical to talk about two of the more robust tools that are used in the enterprise. So Force.com is what the Salesforce application platform has historically been called. And the Microsoft Power Platform, and specifically Dataverse Plus Power Apps, the Canvas apps and model apps in the Microsoft ecosystem, are more widely adopted than Airtable. Airtable is probably more heavily used in the startup world.
Awesome. Producers, this is that moment of the shows where we have got so many questions and more questions than time. So please make sure that you go ahead and vote up the questions so that our panelists can get through them. Next question.
Samuel Nordvik in Norway asks, what are the most interesting and unconventional ways you have used spreadsheets?
Craig?
Let's see. I've done a whole bunch of crazy things. I like pushing the edge of what's possible. I did a family tree that was really interesting, sort of the graphic part of it, to be able to show dynamically. So I've got a table of everyone's dates and generations and who came from where and all of that sort of stuff. And then to have a separate tab that showed graphically how they're all connected and have that adapt. That was quite a challenge. With a lot of the spreadsheets now, with the added functionality of either VBScript or AppScript, you can do a lot of crazy things. I've also done stuff more from a work perspective of doing rack diagrams that are based on a table. So you can have, here's our inventory of all of our gear and where it is. Oh, it's in rack 22A, U position 5, and then be able to look at the rack tables to be able to see that. So that was a big thing. And then we did a lot of collaboration stuff where we're doing an event where everybody had different activities, and it was very dynamic. But those are a couple.
CJ?
Yeah, I got a fun one. I mentioned earlier that I'm a piano player, so I have trouble reading music, but I love chord charts. So I have this thing from Hal Leonard. It's called The Real Book, and they're just a whole book of chord charts. And I have 4 or 5 different copies of this. And then they have this guide that's like, well, if you want to know where a song is, find the song, look at the number that's next to the song, then reference the list at the top that says what book it's in. And I said, well, that's no fun. I'm just going to do this in Excel. And so I did a little bit of, that text manipulation and then VLOOKUPs, and now I can come over here and search for a song and then find out in a hurry what are all of the books that it's in.
Next question.
Eric Kramer in Maine asks, do you feed any of your sheets into a data warehouse /lake/lakehouse, etc., and or perform any larger analysis such as possible with Looker, Studio, etc.?
Ryan?
This is my all day, every day. This is my day job, is helping organizations upgrade from a more brittle set of infrastructure into what has ultimately been coined by Databricks, which is a key vendor in this space, as the data lakehouse. So a data lake is an area where you can store unstructured data like pictures and videos and things like Excel files and text files. The data warehouse tends to look a lot more like the databases that we knew, but is just designed more for an archival type storage or the consolidation of a number of databases in a way that allows us to model and build connections between multiple databases. And so a data warehouse is something that every organization of any scale, even if they're not very big or not a very new organization, data warehouse is something that everybody should be looking at in the age of AI, right? Because something that you'll hear often is you don't have an AI strategy if you don't have a data strategy. And so this is an area that all of us should really be looking to get smart on in 2024.
Next question.
Next question is from Douglas Carmichael. Can you build pivot tables directly from external data sources?
Craig?
Yeah, Yes. Right. You need to, the pivot table needs to operate on the data that's in the sheet. But for instance, at work, I've got a sheet that Google Sheet is pulling in data from a number of places every hour or two, and then combining and doing pivot tables and other types of things live. So it's effectively doing it on the external data. You just need to have it refresh on whether it's every half hour, whatever the time period is, however often it's refreshing.
Next question.
John Snyder, Reno, Nevada asks, what is your favorite spreadsheet keyboard shortcut?
Ryan?
So if you hold down the control key, then you can use the arrows to navigate to the corners of a particular data set or data table. And if you hold the shift key, it will select everything in that range. So getting familiar with control and using the arrows to snap between the four corners and then the shift key to select it is going to be something that's going to change your life.
Nice. CJ?
Every time you touch the mouse, you're slowing down. So Ryan took mine, but I'll give you again Control-Shift, whether you're on Mac or Windows, Control-Shift, and then the number keys will start to reformat your data. So 1 gives it a 2-digit decimal with a comma, 2 is time, 3 is date, 4 is dollars or currency, 5 is percentage. And if you look at the little percent and the little dollar on the 1, 2, 3, 4, that's how you remember it. Also, Control-9 to hide rows and Control-0 to hide columns are wonderful. Oh, and Control+ and minus to add and subtract columns. I used Excel for 10 years before I knew about those, and man, was I upset.
That was awesome. Thank you all for the shortcuts. Next question.
David Brady from New York City asks, Lotus 123 was the spreadsheet solution back in the days. What was the tipping point in its demise?
Ryan?
Probably when it was purchased by IBM.
Next question.
Harshi Trivedi in, this is a tough one. I'm sorry, I should have practiced that one. Between Google Sheets and Numbers in comparison to M365, which product do you feel gives the most familiarity in the learning process? We all have learned Excel from the get-go, but what is the learning curve with the other two products?
Craig?
I think one easy way to start with, I would say Google Sheets, but that's mostly because I'm more familiar with Google Sheets than Numbers, and I use it a lot more with other customers. I'd say one of the things that I often will help people with is you can open up Google Sheets, an Excel file in Google Sheets, just throw it on Google Drive and open it and keep it in the Excel format. You're limited somewhat on the functionality, but it'll operate a lot closer, and then you can save it as Google Sheets and work in that way.
Next question.
Danny Grizzle in Longview, Texas asks, scary but true, I doubt if 2 of 50 Excel users in my org has any training whatsoever. I'm no genius, but got here organically, starting with Lotus and MS Multiplan. Any suggestions on remedial training for end users?
Ryan?
I mentioned Kevin Stratford on YouTube, but in general, there is so much content on YouTube, and it's not just one-off videos. There are numerous playlists that can be curated. And so the way I do this for my team, when I had to do this originally, when I had to learn and when I had to onboard people 10 years ago, we had workbooks. They were big, thick textbooks, and you'd page through them and you'd cross things off. What I do now is use Excel to create a list of YouTube links, put the people that I'm onboarding in columns, and kind of make them check off when they've gotten through a particular piece of YouTube content. And a lot of those YouTubers actually allow or provide a workbook that you can use to work through the examples. So you need to be careful with downloading random Excel files from the internet. But if it's from a creator that you trust, then you're going to have a wealth of resources there on YouTube.
Next question.
Ben Varna in Rosemont, Illinois asks, does anyone have any tips managing text in spreadsheets? I work with a lot of video metadata across platforms. I've been using XLOOKUP, CONCOTENATE, and Power Automate.
CJ.
Big ones for manipulating strings are left, right, and mid. So equals left will let you select the left part, right, the right part, mid will let you select a specified number of characters in the middle of a cell. And also just in Excel, type in equals text, and you will see a whole slew of commands: text before, text after, text split, text join, etc.
Craig?
I took all the good ones. I'd say split and join are super handy. If you've got a sentence and you want to get the second or third word, you can split on the space and do it that way. I'd also say don't forget about trim, just to clean out any initial or trailing spaces that could make lookups a lot harder.
Oh, and the ampersand. You can concatenate. You used to be concatenate. Now you can say equals, cell A1 and B1, and then it'll smush them together.
Next question.
Eric Kramer in Maine asks, what are your favorite add-ons or apps script for Google Sheets?
Ryan?
So Bard and Gemini are now kind of bringing the Gen AI revolution to Google Sheets, and the same is true in the Microsoft ecosystem. So you've got Excel, Copilot. Those are only moderately useful today, but getting better every day. And I would encourage everybody to start experimenting with those, whether it's using the advanced data analysis. I think it's got a new name in ChatGPT to upload an Excel file and work on it, or trying to pull those Gen AI enablement add-ons into your spreadsheet application of choice.
Next question.
Alan Scott in Fredericton, Canada. Do you have any tips for avoiding and troubleshooting calculation errors?
Ryan?
If error is a formula that you can apply before everything else you do. So back in the day when we were doing a lot of VLOOKUPs, just as often you would get an error result. But if you wrap that in an if error formula, then it will, be able to be something you can specify. So you can specify 0 or a blank cell in lieu of the error message.
And CJ?
When you have an error in a formula, take the formula right from the formula bar and then paste it into ChatGPT and say, what's wrong with this formula? And a lot of times it'll tell you, hey, you've got an extra comma, you've got an extra parenthesis. The other thing that I would caution is as you're getting into making nested functions and nested formulas, don't try and mash it all into one cell on your first go. Mash each individual chunk of the formula into a separate column. And then once you understand and are verifying everything along the way, then mash everything together. And that'll help you troubleshoot.
Next question.
Tommy Johnson, St. Paul, Minnesota asks, numbers, Google Sheets, Excel, OpenOffice, oh my, what are their limitations and where do they excel?
Craig?
Yeah, I think as we talked about earlier in the session, it has a lot less to do with the actual features and more to do with the culture of the team that's using it and the actual use case. That has a much bigger thing. So if you're a very Mac-centric shop, use numbers. If you're dealing with mostly Windows or Office 365 environment and you would never bring in Google Sheets there. If you're dealing with a wide variety of people that don't have any specific thing in common, Google Sheets tends to be a little bit better because it's going to work the same across many of them.
Next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama asks, what is the best approach to connect Spreadsheet with production like ATEM? As an offline production, Google Sheet many times need internet access.
Ryan?
So you can enable in Chrome offline access for files in Google Drive, whether that's a Chromebook or a Windows machine. So that's one option. You can also download that as an Excel file or a CSV file so you can look at it offline. In worst case scenario, you can PDF it. So you can create a PDF from those files and download it that way or even print it off.
Next question.
Last question comes from Paul Walhus in Austin, Texas. Laugh if you want. Appleworks remains the greatest of all time of spreadsheets because of its effortless game-like appeal and database. Agree? See page 113 of this article.
Ryan?
We were on fire with questions today, and it seems that we're going to have to plan a second hour on maybe the history of spreadsheets and take a tour back in time.
All right. Thank you so much, producers. You did that because I was like, those are a lot of questions. So as Ryan said, we're definitely going to have to do another hour on this. To our panelists, thank you for all of your insights and all of the demos and just walking us through that. And of course, our production team, without which this would not be possible. And how far we traveled? We traveled 126,000 miles. That's 203,000 kilometers. That's 998 million bananas for scale. That's almost a billion, y'all. For the schedule for the rest of the week, head over to officehours.global and we'll see you next time. Bye.
I have
Y'all
a couple
did
of
that.
ClarisWorks
awesome.
files. Does anybody have? I need help opening those. The dog cows. Remember Claris?
Moof.
Thanks. Moof. Thanks, Liberty. That was fun.
Yeah.
That was really good. Y'all did that. That was a great one. Now I need to go back and take all the notes. I'll just dump it into ChatGPT to get all the shortcuts. Like, what are all the shortcuts from the transcript? You know what? I might make a video on that.
On the troubleshooting, CJ, there's also a thing people aren't aware of. If you highlight part of a formula, it'll give you the
syntax.
It'll give you the result of that. So if you're saying have this long formula that's doing some
like
lookups,
highlight the nested formula.
Yeah, you can say just show me this, and right above it, it'll show you. Oh, that's 32, and you say, oh, what about a little bit more? Oh, that result of lookup means that